In this episode of the Sam Oldham podcast, I'm joined by Eddie Penev. In 2010, Eddie represented Bulgaria at the World Championships and finished 6th in the floor exercise final. 7 years later, he represented Team USA and also qualified in 6th on the floor exercise, but didn't qualify for the final because of the 2-per-country rule. But an amazing achievement to have represented 2 nations at the very highest level in the sport of gymnastics. Eddie is now representing Bulgaria again, and most recently was in the World Cup final in Aussie Jack, competing against some of the best athletes in the world. And this is his story. Eddie, thank you for joining us, mate. I've been looking forward to this episode. I know you have an incredible story, and I actually learned a lot more in the preparation for this about your background in gymnastics, your parents. So just to start off with, Eddie, before we go backwards, just tell me about that World Cup final in Aussie Jack. Was it a good experience being there in Croatia and competing again with the best in the world?
Well, Sam, thank you so much for having me on. Like I mentioned, I love everything that you're doing for the sport and the stories that you're sharing. So OSIAC, I guess we'll start with, it was one of the most competitive World Cups I've ever been to. I mean, 2 of Great Britain's finest, Harry Jake didn't end up competing, but he was there. It was a phenomenal competition, and I kind of approached it as if it were a European or World Championships, because it was going to be a battle just to make the final, because some of the top guys in the world, like I said. And so I got through qualifications and I made it into the final, and it gave me a lot of encouragement that I still have what it takes to be amongst the best in the world on floor.
And what was it like going into that event, Eddie, and preparing, knowing that it was going to be a stacked final if you made it into that final? And obviously with it being very early into the Olympic cycle and floor being one of those apparatus that's been impacted by the new rules the most, was it still a case of trying to figure out this new code and how it suits your gymnastic style the best?
Yes. Every World Cup leading up to the European Championship is kind of trial and error, because I have quite a bit of variations of my routine that I can do. And out of the 3 competitions I've competed so far, every routine has been different. So this was just another stepping stone. But this one it produced a pretty good result, and I'm most likely will use this routine going into the European Championships.
That's really interesting.
But I prepare really very seriously. A lot of mock meets, control competitions, as you guys say in Europe often. And that's, pretty much like any other meet.
And that competition in Croatia, Eddie, did they increase the prize money for that competition? Because obviously the Allevian app, where they're now doing competitions online, which is a completely brand new thing, right? Like for a gymnast like me and you that have been competing for a long time, being able to do routines in a training gym and then submit them and get judged and then potentially get paid is a really exciting thing. And that is coming out of that country in Croatia, but also in Aussie Jack, and it's one of the coaches there, I believe, that coaches one of the gymnasts that set that up. And he also spoke of increasing the prize money at that World Cup. Is that partly why it was so competitive?
I think that was probably 75% of the reason. But I think also it's like a central location in Europe, and it's convenient for a lot of these European countries to go to. And it's just, I must give them props. It is such a well-organized competition, and everything is very accessible to the athletes. There's a huge fan base that turns out for the finals. And they put it on podium as well this year. So, and on top of that, it got moved to a World Cup when it was previously a World Challenge Cup.
Okay.
And the prize money was also, they basically, from my understanding, and I might have this wrong, they match whatever the FIG normally gives as prize money.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. That's really cool. It'd be nice, right, in the future if some more of those World Cups find a way to potentially do that. Then it becomes almost like the Diamond League they have in athletics, and there's an opportunity to, outside of those big major championships or even relying on your federation to fund you, you could actually make a little bit of a career there, which is really cool. So, hopefully in the future, there's more of that for the athletes out there. Eddie, let's go back then to the start, because learning a little bit about your story, it's unique to have one parent that competed at a very high level in the sport that you're competing in yourself, but to have 2 parents, what was that like growing up in that family dynamic of having 2 parents that were successful gymnasts themselves?
mean, yeah, gymnastics was always at the forefront of my family. My parents immigrated to America after, their gymnastics careers ended, and they started coaching because they wanted opportunities. I was just born like the year before, and they moved out here and started coaching. They, never actually coached me. That might surprise some people, but they never coached me because they coached the women. And I kind of just was at the gym because they couldn't afford like a babysitter. And I would just go and basically teach myself gymnastics by imitation. And then eventually I got to the point where it got more serious, and then the rest is history.
And when you started, Eddie, obviously you said that your parents didn't coach you, but your dad was from men's artistic gymnastics, right? What influence did he have on your career in the beginning when you were first starting out? And what type of a gymnast was he? Was he a gymnast that was good on the same events that you're good on? I've always wondered what happens if you're a high-level athlete and then you have I've got a son, right? So I'm very interested in maybe the qualities he would take from me.
I'm pretty sure my dad was a P-bars, high bar rings guy. So
okay, right.
Not quite me. My mom was the more explosive one, you could say. Her best friends were floor and vault. But the first couple of years, they really, if anything, they didn't want me to do gymnastics because they knew how hard it was. So they kept it really recreational for me. They didn't let me start competing until I was like 9 years old, which is like really late in the sport. So I was just teaching, like they were watching me, but there was no official training or official coaching going on until I was maybe like 8 years old.
And when your parents decided to make the move over to America, Eddie, was that around the time that there was a mass exodus of coaches from Eastern Europe moving over to the States and to the UK and all over the world, really? Were they part of that? Was it financial motivations to, hopefully earn more money coaching somewhere else? My coach was a product of that as well.
Yeah. There was a regime change, obviously, in Bulgaria, and it left the country in pretty dire straits economically, and they had better opportunities in America. And so, they were part of that mass exodus.
And what was that like? Culture difference, Eddie, moving to the States and being from somewhere like Bulgaria, and then the approach to gymnastics coaching, and, what was that like for you growing up in that? Because they're two very different cultures, right? Bulgaria, and I imagine growing up in Bulgaria and being athletes, it was pretty hard because, the Bulgarian gymnasts were very high level, and then the States is so polar opposite in terms of culture, right?
So of those early years, all I can tell you is stories I've heard, because I have very few memories, because I was 3 years old when they came over. But from what I hear, I did not understand English. So I was very shy at first. And it was all about learning about the culture. And for my parents too, as coaches, they knew some English, but those first couple of years, it was just as much about coaching as it was assimilating to American culture.
And did they move when they came over, Eddie? Did they move to an existing gym, or did they start their own gymnastics club?
Yeah. They moved to an existing gym in upstate New York. So It's called Rochester. And they worked there for several years before opening up their own gym.
And when you came into the gym, Eddie, and you started, obviously you've got two parents that were successful athletes themselves. What qualities did you come into the gymnastics gym with? And, I guess what strengths and natural talents did you have? Were you straight away from the get-go somebody that was very powerful and, enjoyed training on floor and vault? Because, they're the events where you've done, certainly in the later parts of your career, you've been very, very successful. Was there a natural talent there from the get-go? Was it something you worked on?
Yeah. So my favorite thing when I would go, those early years before I started competing, when I was just basically at daycare at the gym, my favorite thing was to bounce on the trampoline. I was throwing double flips probably when I was 4 or 5 years old, and terrifying everyone in the gym. But yeah, I've been told that I would sit on the trampoline for literally hours at a time. So I developed, I think, air awareness from an early on, and, that bounce in my leg.
And what do you think about the mindset when it comes to coming into gymnastics, having read about your career and the setbacks and challenges that you've faced? Did you show a level of resilience from the beginning? Were you the type of athlete that picked things up quickly? Did you have to work at them?
Yeah, well, it depends. Yeah, on floor and ball, I always picked up things quickly because I had already, even before I started competing, had like taught myself all these skills. But we, coming from, I had an Eastern European, a Bulgarian coach, in fact, not my parents. And we worked pretty hard. We put in the numbers on everything. I don't think everything came to me very easily, but I learned from a pretty early age to work hard, keep your head down, work hard.
And what was it like growing up with parents that have been athletes, Eddie? Is there a level of expectation on your shoulders? That's something that I always think about, because the first question someone will ask me when I tell them that I've got a little boy, they'll say, "Oh, are you going to get him to do gymnastics?" And I'm like, that seems like it's going to be quite a lot of pressure, because everybody straight away is going to expect him to have some kind of natural talent when it comes to gymnastics because of his dad. And I've always wondered what that's like growing up in a sport where, particularly if it's the sport where your parents did excel, what that's like and whether you feel that expectation from people around you or not.
Yes, I can. I've heard that story many times. And I think for me, it was quite the opposite. My parents did not want me to do gymnastics. Right. They wanted to keep it fun and like play in the gym. But they really, even when it got serious, their only goal for me was maybe to earn a college scholarship. Okay. To do elite level gymnastics was never in their plan for me, or never like... If I wanted to, of course, they were going to support it wholeheartedly, but it was not an expectation in my family.
It sounds like that's probably the right approach to take, because, I've seen this 1,000 times, and you will have yourself, like that pressure and expectation and somebody else pushing you to do something. It very rarely works out in the long time, right? And for you, you're still competing now in your 30s, and you must have a real love and a passion for that sport. And I'm sure that if you were, maybe pushed into it or forced into it, maybe that love and that passion would have gone away a long time ago. So, clearly your parents did something. They certainly had the right approach with you. And, it's great that you talk about just playing around on the trampoline, because it's that fun and the love and it's just exploring. And that's what it is in the beginning, right? Like in the beginning, you're not thinking about competing and winning. You're just enjoying what you're doing.
No, I was like begging to compete. I was begging. They were like, no, hold off. We're going to wait. We're going to see if your heart's like really in this, if this is something you really want to do, because it's going to get really hard. But I fell in love with it very naturally. And I really do love gymnastics to this day wholeheartedly.
And so when you start competing at like 9 years old and you're competing out there in America, and I imagine you start getting some success and you're doing pretty well, are there conversations at that point, even as a young gymnast, let's say in your early teenage years, Eddie, about, well, am I going to compete for Bulgaria potentially or Team USA? And what did that look like in terms of your parents are now based in America? Was it a phone call over to the Bulgarian Federation? How did that transpire, Eddie, that eventually led you to competing on the international stage for Bulgaria early in your career?
Yeah, so I went through, the club level. And when I started having some success nationally in America, I still wasn't on Team USA, but we still have a national championships for our junior gymnasts. Word got back to Bulgaria, and there were some conversations there. And, I had always wanted to represent Team USA, but Bulgaria offered me a path to the international gymnastics scene a lot sooner, because I started around 16 to compete internationally, and that would have been very hard to do in America.
Yeah, and you start competing at quite an early age, and I remember seeing you online competing in World Cups for Bulgaria and getting onto the international scene. What did that look like then, Eddie? Back then, when you're still not very old, right, and you're inexperienced, would you travel back to Bulgaria on your own at that point, even at 16, 17? Would you go with your dad or your coach?
Yeah, no, that was my first time traveling alone. The first time I went to Bulgaria, they wanted me to do a training camp, and then there was a selection for the 2007 World Championships. And that was my first time being away from home by myself for that long, and it was quite the experience.
Yeah, wow. Did you compete at that World Championships, Eddie, in 2007?
That was my first World Championships, yeah.
Wow, at 16?
I had turned 17 a few days prior.
Wow, that must have been an incredible. So your career, Eddie,
Yeah,
has spanned so
all
long.
the gymnasts, all the gymnasts I had watched on TV.
Yeah.
I'm seeing them in the flesh for the first time, and I didn't even think I was competing with them. I was just like at the same competition because like I saw them as so far ahead of me. But it was the best thing for me at that time.
And were you competing on 6 apparatus at that time, Eddie? Was that your focus?
This is going to sound horrible to say, but I can't even remember how many. I think I did. I want to say I did either 5 or 6 at that World Championships. I have like vague memories. It was in Stuttgart, Germany, and I was just awestruck by everything going on.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
I think I did 5.
Yeah, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Some real legends competing at that time, especially on floor,
Li
right?
Xiaopeng, favorite gymnast.
Zhu Kai was competing at floor then. Shatilov was in the final. Fabian Dragulescu was still competing. So
Dragulescu was, and Yovchev, he was on my team. He was a legend.
What was that like, competing as a 17-year-old and being on even then, 2007, 2008, Yovchev must have been in his 30s, right? Maybe.
Yeah, he was making every ring final from what I can remember. It was, I just noticed how everybody, because I had known Yovchev, he competed with my dad at the 91 World Championships. Okay. So I had known him from like an early age. So I saw him more as maybe a family friend. I had known him and it wasn't quite the same. But then when we got to the competition, everybody greeted him, and I was like, wow, this guy really is the man.
Yeah, I mean, was he somewhat of an idol and an inspiration for you growing up? Because he really was, as a rings worker, a floor worker, an all-arounder in Sydney.
Yeah, an all-arounder, really,
an incredible athlete.
Yeah, no, he was a huge inspiration. Training with him, it motivated me so much.
And then over those next few years in the lead up to 2010, Eddie, did you start doing the World Cup circuit? And at that point, did it become clear that floor and vault was going to be your pathway into potentially competing in those finals at those championships?
I actually never competed at a World Cup for Bulgaria. It was always because starting in 2009, I went to Stanford University and I was competing on their team. So it was hard to travel for competitions with all the schoolwork. Okay. So I was only going for you can say premier competitions because that's all I could afford to take off because it was very academically rigorous.
Yeah, and I imagine at that time, Eddie, as well, you were probably not allowed to earn any money, right, if you're at college?
Nope.
Right, so it was still back then. And that World Championships in 2010 then, Eddie, just tell me about that experience qualifying for that floor final. If my memory serves me correctly, that's the floor final where Cosmidis won the gold medal, is that right? So another amazing floor final. Did you expect to qualify for that final? You said there that you hadn't been on the World Cup circuit, so you're competing maybe at European Championships, World Championships, and to qualify for a world final at the age of 20 is a huge achievement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once I got to college, I started, I was training with so many amazing athletes, so many of them who were pushing for Team USA, if not on the U.S. national team. And that World Championships was right after my freshman year. And I won vault and got second floor at NCAAs, and that's with like the top U.S. guys. And so I didn't expect to make the World Championships final, but I knew I had some strong routines and some strong gymnastics to offer.
And you always have done quite varied routines, Eddie. And it seems like you've got like a lot of gymnastics in your gym bag. Yeah. And when it comes to adapting to new codes of points, it seems like you never really have any issues doing that. Where did that come from, that breadth of gymnastics? Was that from the coaching of your personal coach? Was that an emphasis? Did it come from exploring and playing around on the trampoline and working on your spatial awareness? Is doing different types of combinations just something you have always really enjoyed?
It came from the trampoline, honestly. We trained every skill. We went from double front all the way to double front with like 2.5 twists. Like everything was, every step was like checked off. And I've been in gymnastics so long too, and you've had to, like you said, adjust to so many different codes. So I kind of have like an arsenal of skills to pick from.
And, you know, you have that success in 2010, Eddie, which I'm sure for Bulgaria was a big deal, right? Because I can't imagine that they had many finals since probably Yotchev was competing there at that time in 2010. So that's a big thing, but you then relatively quickly decide to make the decision to switch and compete for Team USA. What was the driving motivator in that decision, Eddie? I know you're competing in NCAAs at that time.
Yeah.
Was it because at that point you thought, well, my best chance of maybe competing at Olympic Games is being part of a team? And what really drove that decision? And how difficult was it then to make that decision, Eddie?
Very difficult. Honestly, back in 2010, I didn't even think about the Olympics. I was so focused on school because it was so demanding. I was an engineering major. I really knew I had a chance to qualify to the Olympics with Bulgaria, but it wasn't really, I at that time I was taking one competition at a time and really not thinking about the Olympics. But as time went on, it became even more, that was my freshman or maybe going into my sophomore year, ready to 2010. As I got further along in school, it just became so hard to travel and leave, for me at least. And at the same time, I was in the gym every day with guys pushing for the U.S. national team. And I was having all this success at the NCAA level. And I felt like representing Team USA was something within my grasp. And I thought it would make things easier with, like I said, the travel and all that.
And how difficult was it, Eddie, once you made that decision, how tough is it if you're competing in an era or a generation where there are multiple athletes that are very good on the apparatus that you're very good at? And how challenging is that to work out, okay, what's the best route for me to get onto this team? It must be quite hard, right? Because, I'm thinking around that time that you were competing, you've got, Jake Dalton, Steve Legendre, you've got Paul Legere. There's a lot of great floor and vault workers, okay? How challenging was that at that time? And because to me, on the outside, I'm like, wow, you've got the opportunity to essentially always compete for Bulgaria because you're the top athlete on those apparatus, or you're going to maybe have to really fight to get onto a team. That probably says a lot about your character and maybe what your aspirations were around that time and what you felt about your own ability. But how challenging is that?
Two things to be said about that. For me, it felt like I'd always been competing with them. I always competed with them before college gymnastics at the junior Olympic level that we used to have. And I competed with them all through college. And, I was right up there with them. I never, nothing really felt that different when I switched to Team USA. And the other thing is, iron sharpens iron. I was in an environment where I had to step it up to even qualify to the US team. Making the US team was my goal when I switched. It wasn't even necessary to make the Olympics or anything like that. It was just to get onto the US team because, I was training with guys who were doing just that. And I remember how cool it was when they would go to Winter Cup and then come back with all their national team gear and stuff and get invited to these training camps. And I wanted to be a part of that because you're already so ingrained into a team on the college level. Yeah. And in a way, I felt like I was doing something separate. And this was another way to tie me back in to the top guys on our college
Was there an
team.
element as well, Eddie, that I don't know what the system and the setup is in Bulgaria, but did the financial aspect come into it? Is there an opportunity for you to, in Bulgaria, be funded and make a career out of gymnastics in the same way that you potentially could if you're competing on the team for USA and you're maybe getting funding and you're being paid to train full time?
You can get funded in Bulgaria, but while I was the first time I represent Bulgaria, I never really thought about it because I couldn't accept any sort of compensation for my gymnastics sans some airplane, flight stuff. But I never really thought about it. But yes, there are opportunities for funding, and if you have success, sponsors do come in. Yovchev has made quite a career out here.
Oh, amazing. And then after that time, you've made the switch, you finished college, you're very successful in your NCAA career. 2012 comes around. Just tell us a little bit about that time. What were your motivations going into 2012? Where did you fit in that puzzle? And then what were your main motivations after 2012, then going into 2016 and having a whole cycle as a Team USA athlete?
Yeah. So I actually was ineligible for the 2012 to make the national team. Or actually, maybe I could make national team, but I wasn't eligible for the Olympics because there was a 1-year waiting period at the time because I switched at the end of 2011. We only had a single quota in 2011, and that went to Yovchev. Obviously, he was the top gymnast at the time. And I wasn't eligible for 2012, but I was able to go to championships. So, at first I wanted to see if I had the ability to make the national team. And then right after that waiting period, I went to the 2013 Winter Cup and made the national team. And then I started to seriously consider where I would fit in on some more serious teams.
And did you start to get some early success then, Eddie, competing in the States?
Yeah, I was an alternate for 2013 World Championships, and that was, I was less than a year into competing for Team USA. And I had been doing I knew I had to do more events, and I had done 2013 was my senior year of college, and I had been competing in the all around, by then. I think I finished third at NCAAs behind Sam McCulloch and Adrian. So I knew I had the ability to put up like good numbers, especially on a pommel horse and high bar. And in college, you never stopped doing the all around. It was floor and vault was enough maybe in the Bulgarian system, but I knew I had to do more for Team USA.
And how difficult is it, Eddie, to make the decision between, okay, I focus on all around and maybe I try and strengthen my weaknesses here, or I really just focus on my strengths and push those and hope that they're strong enough as a specialist to be selected onto the team? And how hard is it to make that decision when you're a younger athlete?
I think it's when you're a younger athlete, it's really you rely on your coach for that. For giving you that information. My coach at the time, Tom Galimi, he had guys on world teams, Olympic teams. So he knew, and he basically steered me in the direction of, you got to do all around. You have floor and vault, and then you got to pick one or two other events where you can contribute like a third or fourth score. And that's how it was all through the, 2013 to 2016.
What were the biggest differences, Eddie, that you noticed when competing for Bulgaria and then competing for Team USA? Was it the expectation, the pressure? Was it, all eyes on you? What were there differences? Did you notice them? And how did that translate?
Yeah, I think in Bulgaria, we obviously do have a team. We have talented guys, but it's really revolves around individual success because the team usually doesn't qualify in those top ranks. When you're with Team USA, the expectation is team first. You learn that in college, because college gymnastics, is all about team. And then that translates right over into Team USA. So I think that's the biggest difference.
Yeah. And you go through that cycle, Eddie. I think in 2014, you had quite a successful year for Team USA, right? Did you do some World Cups that year? Was it that year that you...
Oh, yeah. Yes. Nothing's hard for me to remember. I did win floor and vault at the Anadia World Cup in Portugal.
Which is a big achievement, right? Like winning gold medals for Team USA.
With Hippolito and Sam McCulloch was there. He was always a huge inspiration. Yes, it was. Well, it was a two-edged sword, really, because I went on to go to Pan American Championships, and that's where I had, my first ACL tear.
And tell us about that, Eddie. Tell me about that, Eddie, because at that point, I imagine that you've had a big confidence boost. You've gone and won gold medals at a World Cup. You're competing with some of the best gymnasts in the world. You then go on to Pan American Games, which again is another step towards competing on a US team, right? And the next step after that is probably going to be a World Championships. Just tell me about how that first injury came about and what that was like, suffering that injury at that point in the cycle, midway through going into 2016.
Frankly, I thought my career was over.
Okay.
I was like, okay, this is it. I heard of gymnasts tearing their ACL, and I always thought, as a floor and vault worker, especially we could say, I thought this is it. It's never going to happen. But that it led me to the Olympic Training Center because I had just graduated from Stanford, and I was offered a place to go do rehab at first at the Olympic Training Center. And they completely completely opened my eyes to what physical therapy and like just focusing on gymnastics was like. Because up till then, I was doing school and gymnastics, and I was like a full-time, athlete, and I was at the lowest point in my career. And yeah, I had to like trust them fully in a way that I've never had to, to deal with something that I thought was like gonna completely end my career.
What are those big differences, Eddie, between being a college athlete and then being a full-time elite athlete? We've had quite a lot of gymnasts from the US come on here, and I guess one of the difficult things is that there's probably a massive dropout when college athletes finish their studying. Well, I either go elite, but how do I fund this career? This is very challenging. So I imagine you lose a lot of gymnasts in America that finish university. They're still quite high-level gymnasts, but in order to justify carrying on at the elite level, there needs to be some kind of financial element in there. What are those big differences that you noticed initially? You spoke about the almost sports science side of things being at the National Training Center. What are those big differences, Eddie?
Well, the thing was, I was on the national team before I left college, so I had they give preference for the Olympic Training Center. If you're already on the national team and you're still in college, you were at the time offered a spot there,
right? And
I was offered a spot to do physical therapy, and then eventually it turned into residency, but. The other part of the Olympic Training Center is there. Your housing, food, everything is taken care of. Your only job is to be, to do your sport. So that really helped. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to support myself on simply a national team stipend.
And what did that recovery look like in terms of time frame, Eddie? And where did that put you in the cycle once you felt like you were back to full fitness? And just how challenging was that getting back to full fitness?
Yeah. It was so hard. I was so demoralized, is a nice way of putting it. But when I got there, when I made the move, because it was a big adjustment. I just finished college. I'm like with all my friends. I have a life in California that I really enjoy, and now you're in Colorado, different place, and all you have is just gymnastics, and you're kind of starting life all over again. But I told myself, I was like, you know what? Maybe this will be the end of my career because but I'm going to do this rehab this better than anyone's ever done it. And I approached that day in and day out with anything and everything that was given to me by the physical therapist and all of sports medicine.
And did you have surgery on your knee, Eddie?
Yeah.
The first time?
Yeah, it was a full tear. I did the surgery in Colorado, and then basically the surgeon's there, and then they move you over to the Olympic Training Center for your rehab, where they have some of the top-notch physical therapists, sports scientists, and they taught me like so much and motivated me in ways I couldn't imagine. And at the end of it, I was better on floor and vault than before. Because I like some other little minor injuries healed. I used the time to get super fit. I was all in. I was going to do this therapy and do it as best as I possibly could.
How difficult is it mentally, Eddie, when you have a very serious injury and that injury impacts your strongest events the most?
Yeah, I thought it was done. Like I said, I just wanted to finish gymnastics after the physical thing. My plan, or I thought I was thinking, I'm going to do this therapy and that'll probably be it. And then 4, 5, 6 months get in, and I'm like, I'm getting really a lot better on horse and a lot better on high bar, and my knee is like feeling really good, and I'm exceeding all the benchmarks that are for in the recovery. And 2015 rolls around, and I'm in the best shape of my life. My knee was still maybe not 100%, but everything else was moving in a phenomenal direction.
After that first surgery, Eddie, on your knee, and you do all that rehab, you get back, you say you're stronger than before. Do you continue with any type of rehab work for the rest of your career at that point? Or at that point, did you just get back fit, get back to gymnastics, and then just kind of clean slate and then move on and just continue as you did before?
Nope. I still do the ACL rehab to
So
this
you
day.
carried that on even after that first.
Every single day I do ACL rehab.
Okay,
like some
really
of the exercises. I will never. Probably maybe when I'm finished with gymnastics too. Physical therapy is not just something that I believe that you should do after injury. I think there's a preventative aspect that a lot of athletes talk about, and it helps immensely.
What did you learn about from the first time, Eddie? And I know, look, we're going to get onto this, and it's quite a remarkable story, having done this 3 times. What did you learn the first time around through that whole process of injuring your knee, having the surgery, returning to gymnastics? What did you learn that first time around? And how, when you look back now in hindsight, having repeated that injury 2 more times, once on a different leg, how has that maybe changed? Does that make sense? Because you come out of a surgery and a serious injury like that and you think, wow, I've learned this, I'm not going to do this the next time. But then that might change once you've done that 2 or 3 times, right?
Yeah. The first time, like I said, a lot of doubt that this is possible to do gymnastics again. I thought, I'm just going to do the rehab and I'm probably going to retire. Every subsequent injury and setback, I knew that I could get through it and be better than before. I knew that that injury is an opportunity. I didn't know that the first time. The first time, just devastated.
Yeah, I remember being we have a gymnast in the UK called Gianni Regina Moran, very successful world champion on the floor. And we used to do testing twice a year. So it was essentially like benchmark testing. And one of the exercises was that you would do a single leg leg press to a metronome beat, and you would max out at 3/4 of your body weight. And so Johnny did this at the start of 2016, so similar time to you, and I think he could do 3 reps on 1 leg, which was very weak, right? And I remember a conversation taking place, and I spoke to Johnny about this with his coach, and it was the strength and conditioning coach said, "Come on, Johnny, you've got to get a lot stronger." And his coach was like, "Well, why? He's the best on floor in this room. Why does he need to do this?" And then I had a conversation with the strength and conditioning coach, and he said, "Well, your hamstring needs to be equally as strong as your quad."
Yes.
If there's an imbalance, that's a lot of the time, that's what causes these issues with your knee and ACL tears. And did you learn things about the mechanics of your knee, Eddie? And do you now see other athletes making mistakes where you think, oh, actually, you should be doing this, or you should be doing that prehab, or you should be strengthening your hamstrings as well as your quads?
Yeah, hamstrings, glutes, quads, everything had to be strengthened. It's funny because prior to the first ACL tear, I suffered from like chronic patellar tendonitis in college. Like my knees hurt. I go through ACL rehab, patellar tendon never hurt again, because I had worked so much on the different muscle groups, stretching, strengthening my glutes, mobility. Sometimes you heal other things by going through the rehab and incorporating it into your training.
What did your approach to the 2016 Olympics and Olympic trials look like then, Eddie? And what was your experience, and how close did you come to potentially being part of that team there in 2016?
2016, I've always been a realist. So I approached it and I was looking possibly, more than likely, if everyone, stays healthy and everything, unfolds as it is predicted, to get an alternate position. And, I really I tried to up my level on, especially pommel horse and high bar, because we did have a little bit of a weakness on pommel horse. And I felt like I was getting there at the Winter Cup in 2016. I won floor and vault after dislocating my finger on the first event. So like finger was sticking out, pop it back in. I ended up doing a horse set and winning floor and vault. And then I made the Pac Rim team. And I did at the time feel like, okay, I'm kind of getting close to this. And I think I went into nationals and Olympic trials with a little too much pressure on myself. And I did fine, but not enough to, ultimately reach that goal.
Okay. And what was it like watching that Olympic Games? Was it one of those experiences where you found it difficult to watch because you wanted to be there, or was it quite motivating watching that competition going into then the next Olympic cycle?
Honestly, I was just really excited for the guys. I'm like I said, I'm a realist. I knew it was going to be a stretch to make that team, and of course, like when I didn't get that alternate position, I was a little upset, but I watched 2016 and I was really excited for the guys because I'd trained with them for so long.
And then you come back from 2016 and 2017 Worlds, is going to be an individual World Championships. Mm-hmm. So an opportunity for you to potentially get a spot on the events where you specialize. Did you come into that Olympic cycle feeling like, okay, this is going to be my cycle. This is where I could really excel. I imagine around that time there were some athletes retiring and walking away from the sport.
Yeah. Yes. So I really wanted to make a push for 2017 and see where things stood. And then I was going to use that World Championships to decide if I wanted to continue. Because we knew at that point, at the end, leading into Tokyo, there would be specialist spots potentially. And so made the 2017 World team, got 2 per country out of floor. But, I felt like that was a moment where, that switch to compete representing Team USA had really paid off because, a lot of people doubted that what's the point? You could always, be on every World Championships for Bulgaria. You're probably not going to ever make a US team. It's too competitive. But that solidified, this is what I had worked for, is to make one of those major teams.
And I watched that routine, Eddie, in preparation for
jittery, yeah.
But an incredibly difficult routine that you were performing around that time, right? Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I had changed my routine. I was doing a whip half to a double front pike half at every competition leading in to the World Championships. And then for the World Championships, we were like, do we do the triple double, the layout double double? And for qualifications, we'll keep it simple. So I went back to the layout double double. But I was doing a lot of different routines. And yeah, it was a fine routine, but, Donnell and Ewell slammed, and that was that.
And then 2018, I imagine you've been part of that World Championships team. You want to then be part of the team for the World Championships in 2018 when the Olympic qualification starts. Just take us through the lead up to the second injury, knee injury, and what your experience was this time around, right? I think the statistics on having suffered an ACL reconstruction and then your chances of doing it again in the first 18 months are very, very high, and injuring the other leg, this is a case of 3 years later. So just take me through that whole story of that second knee injury.
So apart from that first injury was kind of a fluke, hyperextension. All my ACL injuries after that, including the one that happened in 2018, were never because my knee gave out. I had been doing so much therapy. I felt really fit, all this stuff. Every time it happened after that, it was because I was pushing the limits of my gymnastics. I felt better than ever on floor and ball. And it happened in a workout where on a triple double. I had already done the triple double in a routine. And then the assignment was to do a first half. You do a routine and then a first half of your routine. Why would you do, after doing a full set with a triple double, why would you go on the floor and do a first half, water down the first pass or something, or use the pit? But no, I was so confident that I could do it, even though I was exhausted from the routine. And so that's why it just landed a little short. And I had no doubt. I was like, all right, well, this sucks, but I did it once. I'm going to see if I'm going to be competitive with myself. Let's see if I can do this rehab even better. And I think it wasn't maybe the healthiest mindset, because I was like, okay, last time I got back in 10 months, let's see if I can do it in 8 months, which I don't know if it was the way of going about it, but yeah, I competed floor and vault 8 months later.
Was that coming from you, Eddie? You spoke there about doing a full routine and then going onto the floor and doing a first half again. Was that all coming from you? Was that the coach you were working with at the time? Was it a combination?
Yeah.
And can sometimes it be difficult, Eddie, if you're based out of a national center with a national coach that maybe doesn't have all the context of your own career and has to figure that out along the way, sometimes is that a challenge? Because if you're with your personal coach that's known you since you're 5 years old, they know you inside out, right? And they can walk into the gym and they know what mood you're in before you even talk to each other. Sometimes is that difficult when you are based at a national center and you are a centralized athlete to have that close understanding with a coach where maybe they go, actually, Eddie, you need to, today we're going to take it easy. I'm going to make this decision. You might want to go and train and do an extra 2 hours, but that might not be in your best interest. Does that make sense? Because I've been guilty of doing exactly what you've said there, Eddie, myself. Like my ego wants me to think I can still do this even when I'm tired, right?
Of course I can do it. Like I can do anything I'm for. No, my perspective on this has changed. At first I thought I was like, wow, that's like so like, why would you have me do this? But I was 28 at the time. I could have, and I knew how to say no. I just, thought I could handle it. But looking back, like if I had said Andre, because it was Andre Stepanchenko, he was, the head coach at the Olympic Training Center at the time. If I had said, Andre, let's just water down the first pass, or let's use the soft, the tumble strip, he would have let me do it. But it more came from me. At the Olympic Training Center, that is our national training center, but the group of guys that lived there year round was only 5 or 6 guys. And we were like team OTC. It wasn't just like, the national team.
Okay.
We were like a training group. Like it was like a mini like university.
Right. Yeah.
Some of the other national team members trained in other places. They only just came there once every 2 months for training camps.
Yeah. I remember around that time, again, having the same conversation with the strength and conditioning coach. And at that time, there were a lot of quite serious injuries, particularly on the women's side over in the UK, a lot of like Achilles tendons rupturing, again, quite a lot of knee injuries. And it was when the floors started to commonly, essentially all of the floors improved at the same time. And I was having a conversation with him and saying, where are all these injuries coming from? Is it because, the floors are a lot softer, gymnasts are jumping higher? And he said, yeah, but the injuries are coming from the impact on the way down, because if they're jumping higher on the way up, there's more force on the way down. Yeah. And that maybe correlates a little bit with your injury on the way down on the landing on your second knee. And I guess that culmination of load when you're fatigued. Yeah. Sometimes that might have been, because around that time there were a lot of serious injuries with knees, Achilles, and there still are, right? But I think there was certainly an adjustment period to those new floors, because you grew up competing on speed floors and J&F floors and Gymnova floors that were rock solid, right?
Yes. And honestly, at the time, there was, at the Olympic Training Center, we were training on American equipment, which the AAI was not the best floor. Spieth that came out with their, new floor in 2013, but it wasn't until 2021 did the US switch to using Spieth equipment.
Right. Okay.
So whenever I went to a competition, I was like, hallelujah, this is so much easier. It feels like I'm on the tumble track, because the AI floors were not the bounciest, which is even crazier to think I was doing like triple doubles in a first half after routine on an AI floor back then.
What were the differences, in the recovery from the first time to the second time, Eddie? Were there any? You said obviously you came back quicker. Was it very similar? Did you know exactly what you needed to do so you could almost take some shortcuts the second time around? Yeah,
there was no difference. I was like, all right, I know the process. I felt like I was leading them through the physical therapy the second time. I was like, all right, you tell me, let's see if we can, we had all my diagnostics, all the testing we had done. And I was competing with a 2014 version of myself to see if I can, do it even better, have better results every week. They said, if this is going to take 3 weeks, I was trying to do it in 2 and 5 days. It was a competition every time.
And what about then your experience leading into the next Olympic Games in Tokyo? And I know that completely changed with what had happened with COVID, right? And the timescales, everything was moved back 1 year, but you had the same injury at the same point in the cycle halfway through. Tell me about the build up towards 2020 and how that went for you.
It was 2021. That one was the most devastating to me out of all the injuries, everything that's ever happened to me, because we have the specialist spot. national championships, one floor, the best floor routine I've ever done in my life and maybe will ever do. I was like, okay, so, we have a couple of guys on floor, or a couple of guys on floor, a couple of guys on pommel horse, and and maybe one guy on rings vying for this one spot. Because at that point I was 31 and I was like, my best bet is to go for one of these specialist spots. But I was like, well, but the difference is I also have vault. I got second on vault. If I can just upgrade my first vault a little bit, a vault that I've been training for 10 years but never actually competed. It was a Li Xiaopeng Cafon Randy. I was like, if I can just do that for Olympic trials, well, now I have, I'm the best candidate for this position because I have 2 events where I can make a final. And I was in the best shape of my life on floor, like doing it was crazy. At 31, I was doing the hardest gymnastics on floor I've ever done. We even did some online competitions with GB, and I compete with Giarni. We did kind of this head-to-head thing. But anyway, so get through national championships. Now I've made it into Olympic trials, and that's like a huge weight off your shoulders, because if you have a bad national championship, you don't go to trials. You're not on the national team. That's your Olympic run is over right then and there. So I had best national championships, and I had been training this half on Randy, was doing it on the hard surface. First inter squad, I do it. I'm super pumped. Last control inter squad competition before, I'm a little fatigued, but I have to do it. There's 2 days at Olympic trials. Land a little short, feel the knee, and I'm like, no, this couldn't have happened. I walk away. I'm like, no, this probably didn't happen again. This is probably just, I tweaked it. It doesn't feel the same. Do an MRI and torn ACL again.
Wow.
And it still hurts to this day, honestly.
And which knee was that, Eddie? The same knee that you did the first time, or the knee
right
that you
one.
Did the second time?
The one I did the first time, the 2014 knee.
Wow. Yeah, that must have been incredibly bitter.
It was horrible. Because I was like, you know what? I missed out on Rio. I wasn't quite there. This was like the opportunity to make a U.S. Olympic team, which, early on, that was never the goal. We talked about this at the beginning. But, after so many years at the Olympic Training Center, it became the goal, especially leading into Tokyo. Because I was like, that's it. After Tokyo, I am 100% done.
And how tough is it, Eddie, when, you've had all these setbacks and challenges, and I've been there myself, and those setbacks, the challenges, the pain that comes with that, you can justify that sacrifice by telling yourself, but if I make it to the Olympics, it's going to be worth it in the end. But eventually you get to that point where it's like, I might not make it now. This is the 3rd time this has happened. Going into the next Olympic cycle, I'm going to be another 4 years older. You talked about being realistic. At that point, did it switch? You spoke about having the motivation to do the rehab, get back better than ever. This time around, is it a very different mindset that you're in after that injury?
Yeah, completely. I was like, you know what? Well, I'm at the Olympic Training Center. If I retire, they're not, I have to do surgery and I have to go through the therapy and then I can retire. And I approached it very different. The 2014 and 2018 rehab was very all about getting back super quick. This time I was like, you know what? We're just going to do this, take our time. I'm not going to necessarily take it any less seriously, but gymnastics is not the goal anymore. It's about just having a functioning knee for the rest of my life.
And is there a
very
lot
different?
Is there pain and resentment in that period of your life when you look back? Was there frustration and anger, or were you able to just park that to one side, or did that change? Did you go through different periods of time of feeling a different way about the sport? Because, to have had three major knee surgeries, that's a lot, for anybody.
Yeah.
And the mental toll that takes on you coming back from a big injury, emotionally, that takes a lot out of you, I don't know that I was necessarily 100% the same after I injured my ankle and had that surgery on me. It took something from me a little bit because, they're very serious, these injuries that you have. And, at the moment that I'm still competing, I have to believe in my head that I'll be as good as I was before. But when I look back now in hindsight, there was a little fraction of something I lost. And it's not maybe something you can put your finger on it that's tangible, but there's an element of energy and power and explosiveness that you can't measure that just wasn't quite there. So to have had that 3 times is, I'm sitting here thinking, wow, I don't know that I would mentally be strong enough to then keep going through all of that.
Yeah. And, the first and the second time I got back and I was I felt like I was the gymnastics, I don't know what factors what other factors might have been in play, but my tumbling was like just as good, if not better. So the first hold, and the third time I was like, it's just a bunch of resentment. I was so much doubt. Not that I couldn't, because I didn't think I was going to continue gymnastics. I was doubting because of my age. I knew I could do the ACL rehab and I could do it really well, and I was in the best care possible. But I was like, it's my age. Like, I'm not like, I can get through this rehab, but then what? Like, there's a certain point where your gymnastics, the level is going to drop.
Yeah.
And, and I felt like leading into Tokyo, I thought it was already an anomaly that at 31, I was like in the best shape of my life, or at least I think so. At least I'm floor and vault.
I think it's hard, right? You can
get... it was horrible. Yeah.
I think you can almost, when you're an athlete that's had a lot of injuries, your normal can become recovering from injuries, and it can become almost not a habit, but something that you're good at. Oh yeah, I'm great at rehabbing knees, or I'm great at rehabbing shoulders and ankles. And actually, there's going to always be another competition. As soon as you finish that competition, there's another one in a month's time, and a month's time, and a month's time. And making the decision on when do you pull that plug? Because I could just keep going forever here. But do I want to be in this situation again in a year's time, or 3 years' time, or 4 years' time? And, I'm sure you had those difficult conversations with yourself around that period of time.
Yeah. I think it always, and it's to this day, it's all about, now, especially finishing on my own terms. I don't look at anymore the way I did leading into 2016, 2020 of like making the Olympics. I just want to finish on my own terms, like healthy. And that's what it's become now for me.
I find it quite interesting.
Because I always know, I'm like, yeah, it could, anything could happen, but I'm extra careful now. I'm not, what I've learned, especially from the last couple of injuries, is to not push beyond like what is necessary and to keep up with the rehab.
Yeah, I find it really interesting, Eddie, that your inspiration in gymnastics or idol was Li Xiaopeng, and you end up injuring yourself on his vault. How much of that was like doing that vault is almost like, were you influenced by him being your favorite gymnast, that being the vault that's named after him, and you potentially wanting to compete that vault? Like, it's a really interesting story, right?
Yeah. It was him. It was also him in the fact that I had been training this vault since 2010. Like the first time I knocked one, I did a massive one, was back in college, like in training, really nice. And I was like, one day I'm going to compete this. I actually warmed it up at a competition in college, like a dual meet with Oklahoma. And I sprained my foot. And then 10 years later, I'm trying to do it at right before Olympic trials. And I trained it so well, but it's just the thing with that vault, side story, is the way I do it is a little bit harder because my round off and my twisting goes in two opposite directions. So I can't cheat the pre-flight the way Uchimura can, or I have to block and really crank it all the way around. It just makes it a little more difficult. So I was already trying. So I was trying a vault that was already going to be a little bit harder in the first place for me.
And just for people that are listening, Eddie, it's one of the most intricate, technically challenging vaults that there is. Just describe how difficult it is to get the timing and the block right on a vault like that. And in particular, when you're maybe competing it under pressure, you have some adrenaline, maybe your run-up speeds up a little bit, your stride length's a bit longer, you maybe don't get quite the right round off to take off at the right angle, and it all happens in a split second. When you watch vault, for me, even now, I injured my ankle on competing a very difficult vault. How difficult is that apparatus to get just right? And, how prepared do you have to be for every time you perform a vault like that, not just in the competition, but even in training?
It requires the utmost precision and focus, and you have to have the energy that day. You have to feel on. If we're gonna be training this, especially when it comes time to doing it over a harder surface, like I was doing leading up to trials, I would spend an hour before practice getting hyped, because I knew vault workout was coming and I have to do the Li Shao Pong on the hard vault. But I did so many drills, and that vault made me a student of the sport. I can't tell you how many times I've watched Li Shao Pong's Beijing team finals vault. I probably have half the view count. I've studied it. We did so many drills of controlling the run, of being sort of turned on the round off, as you're finishing the round off, to already be a little bit turned. Andrei Stepanchenko, the Olympic Training Center coach, he was such a good technician. We went through so many different drills and methodologies, but like I said, I was at a huge disadvantage with that vault, because round off one way, twisting the other way. And so we kind of almost developed a technique just for me.
Very specific. Yeah, I remember probably when I was around the age of maybe around 21, maybe just before I did my ankle, I was playing around with doing half-on handspring front summy onto high-level landings to try and get, it's like one of the only vaults that doesn't have a name, right? Half-on, double front off. So I was playing around with that. But it's very, very difficult to get the same block for a handspring, double front from that round off. But like you, I was a gymnast that performed a whip half into a tumble, so I could there was kind of a similar type of a feeling there, and understanding pulling your arms down to then go. But I'd still love to see somebody maybe compete a half on double front or drag lescu off. Yeah,
I could see a pike. It's hard from a half on to get your hands over your
into
legs.
Tuck, right?
I could see a half on double
pike off. Oh,
eventually.
That'd be what a vault that would be. That would be beautiful, right?
Yes.
Maybe you're the guy to try it. Do you ever try it, Eddie?
No, my crazy things outside were never from the half on. I was thought of doing a Yunchenko, because I have a pretty good Yunchenko, so full in Yunchenko, Yunchenko double. Yeah. I have it was hard for me to grab my legs, because I have a massive Yunchenko, but it was hard for me to get the compression. So Andre was maybe we should try double. You just keep. So all the crazy stuff on ball was always from a Yunchenko. From the half on, it was only ever really the Randy.
How do you feel about that Yunchenko double? I still think that is the future, is if you can get some young gymnasts doing incredibly good, consistent Yunchenko technique, where they can do an amazing straight Yunchenko, they hit that block every single time, that theoretically, if you start to twist in that tuck, it should give you more rotation. So if you can get someone doing a double pike Yunchenko from quite a young age, then just playing with a double, as long as they're confident in the air and have that consistent block, I think double Yunchenko will be something that is performed at some point in the next couple of cycles.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure if Simone really wanted to, she could probably do it. Because she has that tight compression on the twist. I think it's something that would take, someone who feels very confident from a young age on a Yunchenko. Because I've been competing Yunchenko since I was 15. And, I always wanted to, best block possible. But I 100% think we'll see it in the future. And if not, we'll see it from a cause eventually.
Eddie, just tell me a little bit about the new code and how that's impacted your floor routine, and maybe just some of the ideas that you've got. You're getting to go to these competitions and these World Cups. You're now representing Bulgaria again, which I'm sure feels very much like a full circle moment. How has it impacted the routine, the construction? Where do you think ultimately you're going to go to, and what are you seeing from maybe other gymnasts that you maybe saw at those World Cups that you've done already, and you've gone, okay, this is the direction we're going in? We had the British Championships where Courtney Tulloch and Harry Hepworth were in the rings final. Harry had a much higher execution. Courtney had higher difficulty from doing the triple back. And the next day, Harry's getting that triple back ready to go in. So it's already influencing the way people are constructing their routines.
No. On every event except floor, the dismount has become so critical, because, you're getting more than the 5/10 for the element group if you exceed an E, element. But On floor specifically, biggest difference is that scale. The scale, it's like, I'm half joking, but it is quite the change to like do all this tumbling and then have to like stop and control like all that adrenaline for a solid 3-second scale. I did see Jake Jarman, at the champion, like that scale, it's hard. Like we joke about it, but you can like miss out on a final. In Baku, I got hammered 4/10, missed a medal at the World Cup because I wobbled. I was doing a Y scale because I was like, this like silly, I don't know what you guys call it, but we call it like the regular scale. It doesn't look that cool. So I was like, you know what? Like the first competition, I'm like, I'm going to do a Y scale. And like in training, it was fine. Throw in a little bit of adrenaline and like 4 passes before that. And I was like wobbling and falling over it. Yeah. So we switched it for this competition.
Yeah, it's very
this last competition.
It is, again, it's a joke. We joke about it and we've spoke about it on the podcast. And I think ultimately that's going to get taken out. But it is very difficult, particularly on a Gymnova floor that's softer, to balance at the end of the routine when you're tired. It's very, very challenging. So it does add that element. But, for me, it just seems... It would be it would be very frustrating if you saw an incredible floor routine with the best gymnastics in it and they lose out on an Olympic medal because they don't hold a wide balance that doesn't even count towards the skills that are counting, right? You just have to show it like it.
I think there's a way, I'm just going to use this moment to say this because I really believe this. I think there's a way to increase the artistry and, fix maybe or work towards the overall presentation of a floor routine without throwing an arbitrary 3-second skill. I don't think I think I understand why they added it in, but I don't think that's the solution to what they were going for.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, mate. I'd spoke about, for me, I think as a fan, I'd rather see some kind of, if they're going to have a rule like that is slightly unique to, the requirements, I'd rather see like an originality type bonus, some kind of bonus for somebody doing something that is different, that's original, that we've not seen. Maybe you put, let's say someone competes a brand new skill, there's way more incentive to do that. And it's not just getting your name, it's actually reflected in the start value, something like that, so that we don't end up with 8 routines at the Olympic Games that all look exactly the same. We see different skills, unique skills. I don't know what that looks like, but there's been originality rules in the code of points in the past. I would, if they were going to go down that road, I would have steered in that direction rather than maybe what they've done.
I think they're trying to always alleviate being subjective. And I think, what is original, what isn't. Yeah. It would, I don't know. I'm personally would think of taking some sort of global deduction for presentation and making the whole, like all the transitions cleaner, sharper, fingers, like, like overall posture rather than like throwing a scale in there.
Yeah, no, I agree, mate. I think that then comes down to,
subject.
Yeah, subjective, right? Like, I'd spoke about maybe if you, let's say, and I don't know how you would do this, but you would maybe have to use, it'd be very difficult to work this out fast, but let's say you competed in a final and any skill above a D that wasn't performed by anybody else in the final has some kind of a bonus attached to it. So, you might see a variety of tumbles rather than, I don't know, but something. I'm sure they could figure it out, right? They've got a lot of time to figure that out.
Yes. I think we need a little more time to figure out how we're going to do this. And again, scale's not it for me.
What does this final chapter of your career look like, Eddie?
The final chapter of my career is just finishing on my own terms. Like I said, I don't have, everyone's like, okay, so are you gonna do shooting for like LA? I'm like, absolutely not. I know I'm doing gymnastics till May. And then if May goes well, I know I'm doing gymnastics till June. I'm taking it one moment at a time and being grateful for the longevity I've had in the sport. Despite all the injuries, despite all the setbacks, I walk into the gym happy every day and grateful. And I will finish on my own terms, whether that's at the end of this season or I don't want to put even LA out there because I just don't want to think that big. But whatever that looks like is just finishing healthy and happy. But I could walk away from the sport today and be happy and be content with everything I've
that's
done.
brilliant, mate. And for somebody to be able to get to the end of the career after the setbacks that you've had and to be able to say that is brilliant. You know, a lot of athletes, they can't say that and they finish with a lot of resentment, and you're still competing and you have the opportunity to finish this last chapter off in a really positive way. The world
will keep spinning even when I'm done. Like life goes on. It's hard for some people. Everyone has different, like I know some people really, really struggle, but I know that there's life after gymnastics. It's not everything. I just happen to really enjoy it and, you know, have a lot of resilience in me, you can say.
Eddie, what was it like watching your brother compete at Olympic Games? You know, you've spent your whole, that's a complicated question, right? But you've spent your whole career hoping to compete there one day. You know, what was that like to see him do that? And I guess, what would your hopes be for your younger brother? I think your younger brother's 10 years younger than you, is that right?
Yeah.
So 10 years younger than you. What would be your hopes for his career? Maybe what advice would you give him being 10 years further down the line from where he is right now? I found it very interesting that, you know, you have two parents that are athletes. Your younger brother's been a gymnast. He's now competed at the Olympic Games. That was your dream and still is potentially your dream. If that opportunity is available for you, I know you're just wanting to finish your career, but I'm sure if you get that chance, you're going to take it, right? What was it like watching him compete at the Olympic Games? What are your hopes for his career? And maybe what advice would you give him being 10 years further down the line from where he is right now?
Okay, so for the first part of your question, him going to the Olympics was a dream fulfilled for me. You know, we're family and there's nothing closer than family. And watching him at the Olympics was just as sweet as me being there. I remember watching him do his floor routine. He did the best floor routine of his life in the qualifications. And it was the hardest moment for me just to watch. I like tear up just thinking about it. I was so happy for him. And it really felt like he fulfilled one of my dreams. Because he, of course, is kind of at this point where he's sort of reaching his, you know, peak maybe in gymnastics. You know, he always, you know, wanted to make a world team, let's say, compete on the U.S. national team, ended up representing Bulgaria. But the Olympics was never something that was like omnipresent in his life the way it was in mine at my time at the Olympic Training Center and all that. And so it was amazing to see. And my advice to him is to follow your heart. Like, if this is what you really want to do, you can continue. But if this experience at the Olympics has left you fulfilled and you're ready to move on, that's okay too. You don't necessarily have to keep going at gymnastics or have the career path that I have had. In fact, I'd advise against it. If we're going to make it lighthearted.
No, I think that's great.
It gets tough. It gets tough, you know, and whatever you choose to do going forward, you got to be all in and love it wholeheartedly.
And they say, right, you stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think, you know, your career, and maybe without some of your setbacks and challenges that you've faced, without that, maybe your brother wouldn't have made it to the Olympic Games. So I'm sure you felt a massive part of that. And it's an incredible story. And I'm really excited to follow the journey as it continues, Eddie. And if you make it all the way to the next 4 years, I would not question whether or not you have a shot at making that Olympic Games. It would be an incredible thing to achieve. But I like the way you spoke today about being at a point in your career where you're just enjoying it, you're doing it for the passion, and whatever comes, and all the best as well. I know you're heading to Cairo for the World Cup this weekend that's coming. I'll be looking out to see your floor routine and to see how that floor routine develops over the Olympic cycle. You're somebody whose gymnastics I've always enjoyed watching. So all the best in those competitions that are coming up, Eddie. Where can people follow you online and maybe follow your journey now over the next 4 years if you continue for that long?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm really looking forward to, you know, the World Cup in Cairo, and then, you know, looking towards the European Championships after that. Who knows? But of course, they can follow me Instagram, all that. I post videos often at Eddie_Penev, and
Amazing. Eddie, thank you so much for joining us, mate. You've got an incredible story, and I think there's a lot that young athletes can learn from this, particularly the ones that maybe have faced those big challenges and setbacks and maybe are going through them right now and they're in a recovery phase or a rehab phase. To hear from someone that's been through that 3 times, it really does remind you of what's possible in those moments where you think like, I'm never going to get back or I can't do this. There's always somebody that has faced a bigger challenge than you. So thank you, mate. All the best. Safe travels to Cairo, and I'll be looking out for your floor routine.
Thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate
You're welcome,
it.
mate. Thank you.